Names could be stolen more quietly than coin, and the theft lasted longer. A coin vanished from a palm and left anger. A name vanished from a ledger and left a person arguing against air. Genevieve learned that lesson in hallways where her footsteps were never meant to echo, in rooms where she polished silver engraved with crests that should have answered to her blood. Hope survived anyway, stubborn as moss between stones. It survived in scraps of kindness she gave children no one counted, and in one ring hidden in the hem of her dress, heavy with a wolf king's promise she did not believe she deserved to keep. By the last week of harvest, Ironhold smelled of wet wool, lamp smoke, and old resentment. Rain battered the slate roofs while Genevieve knelt on the kitchen flagstones, scrubbing mud from a line of hunting boots until her knuckles burned. Her dress had once been blue. Now it was a color between ash and surrender. A welt crossed the back of her wrist where the house steward had struck her with a spoon for moving too slowly. The skin at her heels had split under constant work, and each step sent a hot pulse up her calves, but she kept her shoulders steady because pain was safer than protest. "Charity, niece," Lady Mira Ironhold said from the doorway, voice soft as lace and just as cutting. "The council arrives at moonrise. If they see dust on the banisters, you will sleep in the coal room again." Genevieve rose with the bucket balanced against her hip. "Yes, my lady." Mira's gaze drifted over her face, searching for defiance the way others searched for cracks in glass. "Try to look grateful tonight. It is indecent when beggars frown at the table." She left without waiting for an answer. Genevieve pressed her tongue against the back of her teeth until the sharp reply dissolved. In Ironhold, words could become punishments with astonishing speed. Exhaustion crept over her thoughts, the way storms crawled down mountain walls. She was tired in her bones, tired in the marrow, tired in the places that had once believed tomorrow might be different. She carried trays, she washed floors, she kept her eyes lowered, and still they called her ungrateful for the privilege of disappearing. 10 years. 10 years of hearing Charity niece like a collar buckled tighter every season. If she spoke her name, they laughed. If she stayed silent, they wrote lies where her life should have been. She ought to have hated them cleanly, but hatred needed room and breath, and this house gave neither. There were only narrow choices: endure, break, or run. Running sounded like failure until she imagined one more winter here. Then running sounded like breath. At dusk, she carried mulled wine to the small council chamber and paused just outside when she heard her own name, spoken in Bastian Ironhold's voice. "Genevieve's signature will be enough," he said. Papers crackled. "Kinship debt transfer, bonded service continuation, and marriage assent. The magistrate only needs a thumbprint and 2 witnesses." A second voice, thin and eager, belonged to Councillor Renwick. "You are certain no one remembers the Valewood claim?" Bastian laughed. "The Valewoods died years ago. Records burn well in dry weather." Genevieve's grip tightened on the tray until the cups rattled. Through the narrow gap she saw Bastian lean over the table, thick hands spread on a map marked with 3 pack borders. His hair had silvered at the temples, but his eyes remained hard and bright, like stones pulled from river ice. "She marries where I tell her," he continued. "Then I submit her blood in the coronation rite and regularize succession over the ridge packs. Lawful and sealed. Some whisper she resembles Elowen Valewood. People whisper many things when they are hungry. I feed this region. They will repeat whatever story keeps their bowls full." A servant in the hallway coughed, and Genevieve moved fast, entering with lowered gaze, setting the tray down before anyone asked how long she had been listening. Bastian dismissed the others with a flick of his fingers. The door shut. Silence pressed close. He circled her once, slow and deliberate. "You look pale. It has been a long day. It will be a longer tomorrow." His fingers closed around her chin, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to remind. "You will stand beside me in the council hall and sign what is placed before you. Smile, Nod. Play grateful orphan. If you embarrass me, the children from servant quarter lose their lodging by sunrise, their little blankets and bowls on the street in winter. You understand. She met his stare for one reckless heartbeat, then lowered her eyes. Yes? Say it properly. Yes, Lord Ironhold. He released her and wiped his hand on a cloth as if touched by dust. Good girl. Do not mistake courtesy for weakness. Your mother did once. The door opened. He walked out. Her knees nearly gave way. She steadied herself on the edge of the war map and stared at the inked borders, at the circles drawn around territories that would bleed for one man's ambition. On the far corner of the table lay a folded warrant stamped with Ironhold seal wax. Her name sat in the center in sharp black script: runaway bonded servant, theft suspect, debt absconder. She did not need to open it to know the charges. Bastian planned every path at once. If she signed, he won. If she fled, she was a criminal. 3 days earlier, in the lower market, a scarred stranger had bought winter apples from old Tamsin and paid double without comment. Genevieve had recognized him only when he met her gaze, and Amber bled into his irises with that predatory stillness she had seen once from a battlement far away. Darius Wildfire, Alpha King of the Mountain Fortress, in a traveler's cloak and plain gloves. He had watched her bind a bakery boy's cut hand with her own kerchief, while his guards pretended not to watch anything at all. When she tried to leave, he stepped close enough for cedar and smoke to cut through market spice. If you need sanctuary, he had said quietly, placing a signet ring in her palm. Show this at any Wildfire gate. No debt crosses my border unless freely sworn. She had almost given it back immediately. Men with power always price their mercy. Yet his gaze held no bargain, only a restrained urgency that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. She stitched the ring into her hem that night and told herself it was only metal. Now, with Bastian's warrant cooling on the table, metal became possibility. By the first bell of night, she made her choice. She did not pack clothing. Cloth slowed runners when wet. She took dried oats in a small sack, a water skin, and from the archive room she stole one thing only: a brittle page half torn from the old succession register, the portion Bastian missed when he burned the rest. Valewood Line, last direct issue. Genevieve Elowen Valewood. The ink had faded, but the moon seal watermark remained visible when held to candlelight. She folded it into oilskin and tied it against her ribs. In the servants' corridor, little Ina rubbed sleep from her eyes and shuffled out clutching a rag doll. She was 8, all sharp elbows and solemn stare. You leaving? Ina whispered. Genevieve knelt despite the protest in her feet. I am going to fetch help. Ina looked toward the main wing and back. They said you are bad. They say many things. Genevieve tucked a loose curl behind Ina's ear. Listen to Cook Mara tonight. Stay with the others. Do not wander. Ina nodded once, fierce and tiny. Come back. The words lodged under Genevieve's ribs like a vow and a wound. The storm broke as she slipped through the laundry yard, rain needling her face, wind flattening her dress against shaking legs. Hounds barked from the east kennel. She cut west through the herb terraces, vaulted a low wall slick with moss, and landed badly on her right ankle. Pain shot upward. She bit her lip and kept moving. Behind her, a horn sounded from the gatehouse, one long note that meant missing servant, not yet full alarm. The forest path turned to mud within minutes. Brambles snagged her sleeves. Twice she had to crouch while mounted patrols passed on the ridge above, lantern lights swinging like hostile moons. The second time she heard 2 men talking over the rain. Warrant says theft and debt. Bastian wants her breathing. Council show tomorrow. Then pray she runs stupid. Their laughter thinned with distance. Genevieve waited until the hoofbeats vanished, then crossed the creek barefoot to erase her trail and climbed toward the mountain border where black pines gave way to stone. Midnight found her at the first wildfire marker, a monolith carved with wolf runes that shimmered faintly under rain. Two sentries stepped from shadow with spears leveled. Their cloaks were dark, their faces unreadable. "State your claim," one said. She pulled the ring from her hem with numb fingers and laid it on her open palm. Even in stormlight the signet caught silver, the wildfire crest cut deep and unmistakable. The older sentry's posture changed instantly. "Who gave you this?" "Darius Wildfire, Market Quarter, 3 days ago." He studied her soaked dress, split lip, trembling hands. "Name?" She swallowed. "Genevieve." "Genevieve what?" For one suspended moment she could have said Ironhold and remained hidden in the lie that had caged her for a decade. Instead she answered with the truth that still felt dangerous in her mouth. "Valewood." The sentries exchanged a glance she could not decode. Then the older one lowered his spear. "You are under wildfire protection now. Come." The mountain fortress rose from the cliff like a carved storm cloud, torchlight burning along its walls in disciplined lines. She was brought through side passages to a vast chamber lined with maps, weapons, and old banners singed at the edges. A war table dominated the center, scarred by years of hard decisions. Darius was not there. Dawn still sat hours away. A healer tried to guide her toward a cot. Genevieve shook her head. Her hands would not stop shaking. If she slept here, if she let herself be wrapped in safety, the trap might spring anyway. Bastion would claim she came to seduce power, to purchase status with tears. He would use Darius against her, as he used everything else. She placed the signet ring at the center of the war table. No note, no plea, no explanation she trusted anyone to believe. Then she turned and walked out through the servants' arch before the fortress woke, into the paling dark beyond the outer ward. At sunrise Darius entered the chamber with rain still on his shoulders from the battlements and found his ring waiting where generals laid battle plans. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, while the animal part of him paced against his bones, sleepless and relentless, refusing rest, refusing reason, refusing to accept that silence meant goodbye. Darius closed his hand around the ring so hard the edges bit into his palm. The chamber still carried her scent beneath rain and steel. Faint now, a wildflower note threaded with fatigue and cold stone. His wolf paced, not with anger but with a raw insistence that stripped away every convenient interpretation. She had not returned his promise to wound him. She had done it because she believed accepting it would cost him something he could not afford. Captain Alara stepped through the side arch, armor half-buckled, hair damp from the watch. The gate sentries reported her arrival, then departure through the outer service ward. No escort, no supplies beyond what she carried from Ironhold. Direction: southwest descent toward the old terraces, then the rain erased the trail. Darius set the ring back on the table with deliberate care and reached for his cloak. "Ironhold will already be searching." Alara's mouth tightened. Their riders came to the lower pass at dawn with stamped warrants. Theft, debt flight. They demanded right of seizure inside our boundary. A growl moved through his chest, low and involuntary. "And?" "I told them wildfire law does not lease bodies." "Good." He turned, then paused. "If she asks for distance, give it. If anyone lays hands on her without consent, I will treat it as an attack on my crown." Alara bowed once. "Understood." An hour after sunrise, Genevieve reached the broken switchback above the lower quarry and nearly fell when her bad ankle caught between two roots. She braced against a standing stone slick with moss and breathed through the bright, nauseating spike of pain. The mountains looked different on this side of fear. Ironhold had always taught her the wildfire territory was feral, lawless, ruled by fangs and temper. Instead, she found terraced paths maintained even in rain, boundary carvings kept clear of vine, watchfires banked with discipline instead of waste. Order lived here. Not gentleness exactly, but a structure that did not rely on humiliation as currency. That realization frightened her more than chaos would have. Chaos, she understood. Order invited longing. Mist rolled through the pines in pale ribbons, carrying the scent of wet bark and distant forge smoke. Below, she heard voices and the clink of tack as riders changed mounts at a patrol post. She crouched behind a boulder and pressed her hand over the oilskin packet tied beneath her dress. The register page crackled against her ribs like a second heartbeat. I cannot stay. I cannot bring this to his door and call it fate. If I stand beside him, Bastion turns me into evidence. If I run far enough, maybe he settles for hating only me. The thought collapsed under its own weakness. Bastion did not settle. He harvested. She forced herself down the last slope, one careful step at a time, and emerged onto a narrow road paved with old slate. 3 wildfire sentries turned at once, hands moving to weapons, then freezing when they recognized her face from the gate report circulating through the watch. The youngest, a broad-shouldered man with a scar over one brow, looked almost relieved. Lady Genevieve, he said. The title landed like a stone dropped in deep water. Do not call me that. He glanced at the others. The Alpha has orders. You're to be brought in safely. Brought in feels close to taken. No one here intends harm. She believed he meant it. She also believed intention and outcome were often strangers. If I return, Ironhold will claim Wildfire harbored stolen property. One of the women on patrol, older, gray streaking her braid, snorted softly. You are not property in any code I serve. Something in Genevieve's throat tightened with sudden, embarrassing heat. She looked away toward the valley, where rain feathered across ruined columns half swallowed by ivy. The old moon temple sat there, abandoned since the last quake, its central arch still standing like a broken jaw against the sky. A horn sounded from the North Pass, then another, closer, carrying the clipped pattern Ironhold riders used for legal summons. The older sentry swore under her breath. They crossed faster than expected. Genevieve straightened slowly. How many? Too many for a courtesy petition. She made the decision with the bleak clarity of someone who had been cornered enough times to map the shape of traps from memory. Take me to the temple. The youngest frowned. That ground is exposed. That ground is neutral old law site. If they want a public seizure, let them ask for it under witness. Not at your gate, not in his hall. The woman with the gray braid studied her for a long beat, then nodded. Move. They descended through rain and shattered stone while thunder rolled along the peaks like distant drums. By mid-morning, wind pushed the storm sideways and the temple ruins gleamed black and silver, every carved line running with water. Half the outer wall had collapsed, leaving the central ring open to the sky. Moon runes, worn almost smooth, circled the dais in a pattern Genevieve remembered from childhood stories told in whispers. Truth spoken here had weight in pack law. Even kings could not casually dismiss. Wildfire sentries fanned out at the perimeter, not threatening, simply present. Genevieve stepped onto the dais and felt cold travel through the soles of her boots into bone. Across the valley track, Ironhold riders emerged between the columns, cloaks snapping in the wind, warrants held high as if parchment were a blade. Their leader, Magistrate Corvin in traveling leathers, raised his voice. By authority of Ironhold household law and bonded debt statutes, we claim custody of Genevieve Ironhold, accused of theft, contract flight, and incitement. She almost laughed at the precision of the lie. It would have hurt less than this exhaustion that made every breath feel borrowed. A second movement at the edge of her vision pulled her attention to the western stair. Darius climbed from the lower path alone, rain streaking the scar that crossed his cheek, dark hair plastered back from his brow. He wore no crown, only a battle-worn coat, and the kind of stillness that made armed men reconsider their distance. For a suspended moment the scene narrowed to his presence and the ring now hanging from a cord around his neck. He had not put it back on his hand. He had kept it close anyway. "Genevieve," he said, voice roughened by sleepless hours. "Come down from there." She shook her head. "If I step behind your line, he gets what he wants. He says you stole a debtor and violated council process." "He says many things. And councils love paperwork more than truth." Ironhold riders spread wider, attempting to encircle the ruin without crossing the inner rune line. Magistrate Corvin lifted a sealed folio. "Alpha Wildfire, surrender the accused and preserve peace. Obstruction will be entered as hostile interference." Darius did not look away from Genevieve. "You are standing on my territory with forged claims and calling it peace." Corvin's smile thinned. Then let her answer for herself. Genevieve could feel every gaze on her skin like sleet. The old instinct rose. Make yourself small. Survive the hour. Endure what follows. Yet another impulse, sharper and stranger, lifted beneath it. Not bravery. Not exactly. More like the first crack in a wall she had carried so long she forgot it had a shape. If I surrender now, children are hostages by nightfall. If I run again, this keeps happening to everyone within reach of his hand. If I stay here, I drag a king into my ruin. She stepped toward the edge of the dais, toward the narrow gap between Wildfire and Ironhold lines. "I will go with the magistrate," she said, the words tasting like ash. No clash, no blood. Darius moved then, crossing the space with startling speed. Not a lunge, a claim of presence. His fingers closed around her wrist just above the pulse point. Heat struck. Not metaphor, not suggestion, but a real, searing current that traveled from skin to marrow in a single devastating rush. It felt like molten silver poured through two separate bodies, and discovering they were one circuit all along. Genevieve's breath tore out of her. The rain seemed to pause on the edge of falling. Her pulse split. One rhythm hammered in her chest, frantic and human. The second came from the hand gripping hers, a deep, measured cadence echoing up her arm as if his heartbeat had found a chamber inside her ribs and settled there. Darius drew a sharp breath, eyes widening, then narrowing as amber overtook the dark of his irises, and the predator looked out through him with ancient recognition. He did not release her. His thumb shifted once against her skin, stunned, reverent. Around them, both patrol lines went utterly still. Inside Genevieve, awareness prickled along her spine until every nerve felt newly named. Cedar and smoke and storm wrapped around her senses, not as a scent this time, but as a vow with teeth. Desire crashed into terror so fast she could not separate them. The Bond stories had always sounded romantic when spoken by safe people in warm rooms. In reality, it felt like standing barefoot in lightning, asked to trust the fire. "No," her mind insisted. "This cannot be mine. If he is mine, Bastion will carve us both into law and call it destiny." The animal part of her, buried for years beneath obedience and work, and carefully swallowed fear, went rigid and alert, then leaned toward him with a fierce, aching certainty that made her knees threaten to fold. Darius's voice dropped to something meant for her alone, though everyone heard it. "You did not return my ring because you wanted freedom from me." Rain ran down her temple, cold against skin still burning where he touched her. She met his gaze and could not look away. "I returned it because I thought staying would destroy you." His jaw flexed. "Genevieve, look at me." "I am looking." "Then stop deciding my limits without me." The words landed with the force of a gate blown inward. She saw, all at once, the sleepless fury in the tension of his shoulders, the controlled rage in the set of his mouth, the fear he had not hidden quickly enough when he thought she might step into Ironhold custody. Not possession, not pride. fear of losing her specifically, as herself. Magistrate Corvin recovered first, voice slicing across the charged silence. Touch does not void warrant. Release her. Darius turned his head just enough to bear the edge of a fang as his canines lengthened, partial shift rippling through hands that ended in darkened claws at her wrist, yet held with precise restraint. "You are standing in a moon court under old witness," he said. "Choose your next words with care." Genevieve felt the bond thrum between them, terrifying and luminous, as thunder cracked above the ruined arch and the first silver flare of rune light kindled beneath their joined hands. Silver light raced outward from their joined hands, threading through the worn moon runes and climbing the broken columns like fire learning language. The ruin answered with a low hum that settled into everyone's bones. Magistrate Corvin took one step back, then another, his riders following by instinct when the inner ring brightened under their boots. "Moon Witness is active," the older Wildfire sentry called, voice carrying over rain. "No warrant may be executed until testimony is heard." Corvin's mouth tightened. "This is theater." "It is law," Darius said. He turned fully toward Genevieve and, for the first time since his fingers closed around her wrist, she saw him force the wolf down from the edge without breaking contact. It was not suppression born of shame. It was discipline, hard-won and deliberate, laid between her and the men waiting for him to lose control. Water traced the scar along his cheek. Amber still burned through his gaze, but his voice steadied into something formal. "Genevieve Valewood, under Moon Witness and Old Border Statute, do you request wildfire protection of your own will?" Every person in the ruin waited on her answer. She felt the bond pulse between them, a second rhythm that refused denial, and terror rose with it. Choosing him would paint a target across his house. Refusing him would hand Bastion her throat and call it compliance. "I request protection," she said, each word careful. "For myself and for any servant child named in Ironhold retaliation." Darius inclined his head once, as if she had offered him a command and not a plea. "Granted." Corvin lifted the folio again. "Ironhold contests the name Valewood and demands immediate custody pending council review." "Then file contest before the High Tribunal," Darius replied. "You have heard her declaration under witness. You touch her now. You breach Moon Court in my territory." Corvin looked toward the brightened runes, calculating, then spat rainwater and fury to the side. "This delay will cost you." Darius's expression did not change. "Leave." Ironhold withdrew in tight, angry formation, hooves striking wet slate as they vanished into mist. Only when they were gone did the rune light dim, dropping the ruin back into storm gray and cold stone. The release hit Genevieve all at once. Adrenaline drained from her limbs so fast her knees buckled. Darius shifted closer, but did not catch her without warning. "Genevieve," he said quietly, one hand hovering near her elbow, not touching. "May I?" "Permission." In front of armed witnesses, with rain running down both of them and her breath shaking, he asked permission. She nodded once. His hand settled at her forearm, firm and warm despite the storm. He guided her down from the dais, one careful step at a time, as if any sudden movement might fracture something newly forged. At the foot of the stair, he stopped again. "You are limping on the right," he said. "Can you walk to the lower gate, or do you want me to carry you?" Confusion cut through exhaustion. No one had asked what she wanted while she was hurt in 10 years. Hurt had always been treated as either inconvenience or proof of failure. "I can walk," she whispered, then swayed when pain flared up her ankle. He did not argue. "Then, we walk slowly." They moved through pines bent by wind, escorted at a respectful distance by wildfire guards who looked everywhere except directly at her. The restraint unsettled her almost as much as the bond had. She had built a life around anticipating violation. This measured space left her with nowhere to place old reflexes. By late afternoon, the storm thinned to a fine, needling rain when they reached the fortress infirmary, a long stone chamber warmed by braziers and cedar steam. Healer Sarah approached with clean cloth and bitter-smelling salve, then paused when Genevieve flinched from the movement. Darius spoke without looking away from Genevieve. "No one touches her without consent. Ask first. Every time." Sarah nodded immediately. "Genevieve, may I examine your ankle and feet?" Genevieve swallowed and gave a shaky yes. The answer cost more than it should have. She knew that, and hated it, and could not change it in a single breath. She sat on the cot while Sarah cut away soaked wrappings, split skin, blistered heels, bruises in varying colors, old and new. Sarah's jaw hardened, but her hands remained gentle. When the bandaging was done, Genevieve expected orders, questions, strategy, perhaps pressure to present evidence before counsel. Instead, Darius set his sword belt on a chair, removed his gloves, and sat on the floor beside her cot like a soldier taking first watch. "You need sleep," he said. She stared at him. "And you?" His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "My wolf has opinions about that." A reluctant sound escaped her, almost a laugh, rusted from disuse. "Mine has spent years silent. I do not know what to do with opinions." "Let her relearn," he said. The infirmary quieted as evening settled over the fortress. Rain tapped the narrow windows. Somewhere deeper in the keep, a forge bell rang twice and fell silent. Genevieve drifted, woke, drifted again. Each returned to wakefulness bringing the same disorienting fact. He was still there, not looming, not demanding, simply present with his back against stone and his attention sharpened to her breathing. At one waking, he was rewrapping her left heel, big warrior hands moving with painstaking precision over skin rubbed raw by miles of wet road. She watched him knot the bandage and said, "You are an alpha king. You should not be doing this." His gaze lifted to hers. "I should do whatever keeps you from bleeding through tomorrow." She looked away first. Later, thunder cracked over the ridge so hard the window shutters jumped. Genevieve jerked upright, breath short. Old panic flashing through her body before thought could catch it. Darius rose immediately, then halted at arm's length. "Do you want touch?" he asked, voice low. "Or distance?" The question nearly undid her. "Distance," she managed. He took off his cloak, heavy wool lined in fur, and laid it across her knees instead of her shoulders. Warmth pooled around her without closing around her body. Chosen gentleness, no trap springing from kindness. The room darkened toward full night. She pulled the cloak tighter and watched him sink back to the floor. The scar at his throat caught firelight when he tilted his head, and curiosity slipped through fear. "How did you get that one?" He followed her gaze, then answered without ornament. "Battle of Grey Hollow. Council sent me to hold the ford with 60 wolves against 200. They expected a pyre by dawn and a clean line in the succession book. King without an heir dies bravely. Council appoints someone easier to manage." Her chest tightened. "You survived." "Barely. The burn came from chain fire meant for my neck." He flexed his hand once, as if remembering weight and heat. "I learned 2 things that night. Men who speak most about destiny often mean control, and survival is not the same as living." He held out his forearm then, slow enough for refusal, showing old burn marks crossing muscle in pale, ridged paths. "You keep waiting for me to act like power has no cost. It does." She hesitated, then laid 2 fingers along one scar. His skin was warm, his pulse steady under old damage. Not invincible. Enduring, exactly as he claimed. Inside her, thought rose in a present tense rush she could not mute. "I am waiting for the bargain, for the hidden ledger where kindness appears with numbers beside it. I am waiting for his hand to close and not open. I am waiting because waiting kept me alive. But he asks. He waits for answers. He gives space when every story says an alpha takes what fate places in reach. If I step toward this bond, I hand him every soft place I have left. If I do not, I keep bleeding alone and call it safety. I do not know how to trust and still keep my name. I do not know how to be wanted without becoming useful. I am so tired of fearing shelter. She withdrew her hand slowly. Thank you, she said, the words unfamiliar and sincere. Darius bowed his head once, accepting it as if it mattered. By first light convened under emergency moon witness procedure, the High Tribunal assembled in the fortress Great Hall under banners darkened by old smoke. Benches filled with pack delegates, captains, and elders from allied territories. Genevieve stood at the center ring wearing a plain charcoal dress provided by the keep, Darius's cloak still around her shoulders despite clear weather. The register fragment rested in an oilskin packet at her waist, tangible proof against years of erasure. At the far dais, Elder Varric of East Ridge peered down his narrow nose. We are expected to believe a household servant appears with a royal claim and a mating rumor in the same week. Convenient. A few delegates murmured agreement. Another elder, Lady Senna, tapped her cane. Ambition has many costumes. This one wears humility. The words struck old bruises with practiced precision. Genevieve held her posture anyway, palms damp, throat tight. Darius stepped out from the shadow of the pillar and took position half a pace in front of her, not blocking her, anchoring the line. He did not raise his voice. Record this clearly, he said to the tribunal scribe. Under Alpha Law 9, challenge to an unclaimed mate passes through me before any accusation touches her person or standing. Varric scoffed. You invoke mate privilege before formal claim? I invoke protective statute before public humiliation dressed as process. Lady Senna's gaze sharpened. And if she manipulated you? Darius turned toward Seer Malus, the gray-veiled woman seated beside the oath brazier. I petition memory witness. The hall shifted with collective surprise. Memory witness was costly and intimate. Falsehood under seer sight carried severe sanction. Malus regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Consent is required. I consent, Darius said. Malus touched 2 fingers to his temple. The brazier flared silver, and his memories spilled above the flame in wavering light. The market lane where he placed the ring in Genevieve's palm and asked nothing in return. The war chamber at dawn with the ring left on scarred wood, his wolf pacing battlements through the night while fear hollowed his restraint. The temple reign where she tried to surrender to prevent bloodshed. No seduction, no plotted ascent, only sacrifice sharpened into silence. When the vision faded, the hall remained quiet long enough for shame to settle on a few elder faces. Varric cleared his throat. Memory can be interpreted. Genevieve reached for the oilskin packet. Then interpret this. She handed the register fragment to the scribe, who passed it to Malus for authentication. Under lamp heat, the moon seal watermark rose clear and unbroken. Malus lifted it for the benches to see. Valewood succession leaf, she announced. Original fiber, unaltered ink in surviving section. A captain from North Watch, impatient and broad-chested, strode down from the side benches and reached toward Genevieve's arm as if repositioning evidence on a table. Stand nearer the light. Darius moved between one heartbeat and the next. Claws slid from his fingertips in a controlled partial shift. Not wild, not theatrical. Simply unmistakable. Power rolled through the ring hard enough that several guards lowered their eyes. No one touches what she is not freely given, he said. The captain froze, then stepped back, color draining from his face. Understood, my alpha? Genevieve felt the entire hall recalibrate around that sentence. Protection, not possession. Boundary, not display. It landed where old terror had lived and left a different shape behind. Lady Senna leaned forward slowly. Genevieve Valewood, do you seek crown through bond? Genevieve met her gaze. I seek legal personhood for those sold under fabricated debt, beginning with servant quarters. If crown blocks that, I refuse crown. If crown enables it, I will use it. Silence again, but this time it carried weight of a different kind. Melis set the register fragment beside the brazier and bowed her head toward Genevieve in formal acknowledgement. Her claim merits full council hearing, the seer said. Immediate coercive custody is unlawful under Moon Witness and Alpha Protection. The ruling was procedural, not victory, yet the room's hostility cracked at the edges. Delegates began whispering in practical tones instead of contempt. Scribes scratched new lines into the record. As benches emptied, Darius remained where he was until Genevieve shifted first. He looked at her with the same contained intensity he carried in battle, but his next words were quiet. I know this is not trust yet. She studied him, the scar, the patience, the restraint that had never once demanded gratitude as payment. Then she did what fear had forbidden all week. She placed her hand on his forearm of her own accord, light but steady. Not trust yet, she said, but not fear in the same way. His shoulders eased, a small movement most would miss. I can work with that. So could she. So could she. And the fragile admission had barely settled between them when the side doors of the great hall opened again, and a messenger in Ironhold colors strode past the thinning benches, with the rigid confidence of someone carrying sanctioned cruelty. He did not bow to Genevieve, he bowed to procedure. Delivery for Alpha Wildfire and the emergency tribunal record, he said, holding out a black waxed folio stamped with Bastion's crest and the council knot. Darius took it without breaking eye contact. State your name for the scribe. Clerk Hadron, sworn courier for Ironhold Council business. Melis signaled the nearest scribe, and the hall, which had been dissolving into private clusters of argument, tightened again around the ring. Darius cracked the seal. Genevieve watched his expression shift by degrees, not surprise first, but recognition, as if he had expected an attack, and only needed to learn its shape. Read it aloud, Melis said. Darius passed the folio to her instead. You should. The seer unfolded the pages and her voice carried to the rafters. Petition of Lord Bastion Ironhold for emergency consolidation hearing before the full Allied Council. Claims include contested identity of one Genevieve Ironhold, also known as self-styled Genevieve Valewood, alleged theft of restricted archives, unlawful incitement across pack boundaries, and fraudulent attachment to a reigning alpha for political gain. Her mouth thinned at the next line. Supplemental motion seeks temporary transfer of all former servant quarter dependents into Ironhold protective custody pending inquiry. Genevieve felt the stone floor tilt beneath her. Dependents. He had found language that made children sound like inventory. Melis continued. Addendum cites precedent of blood arbitration under pre-unification coronation right if lineage dispute affects multi-pack succession. Darius stepped forward a fraction. Read that line again. She did, slower this time, and every word rang harder than the last. Blood arbitration, multi-pack succession, not a household dispute. A claim to crown architecture. Captain Ilara swore under her breath. He is not trying to retrieve her, he is trying to legalize expansion. Genevieve's thoughts sharpened to a painful edge. He told Renwick he needed my signature and blood to regularize 3 borders. He already mapped it. Darius turned to her fully. When did you hear that? In his council room. The night I ran. She met Milas's gaze, then Ilara's. He burned records to erase Valewood succession. If he can force a kinship contract and stage a rite under council witness, he can call conquest inheritance. By late afternoon, rain had cleared from the fortress windows, and light struck the old banners like a challenge laid across worn cloth. In the war chamber, maps covered the central table again, this time weighted with seal stones, copied warrants, and one narrow ledger Alara had pulled from confiscated Ironhold dispatch satchels. Genevieve stood opposite Darius, both hands braced on scarred wood, while Milas traced routes between servant districts, border courts, and council roads. He is dangerous because he understands bureaucracy as a weapon, Malus said. Men like him rarely need open force. They make violence look procedural. Alara tapped a notation with her dagger tip. He also moved coin to 2 undecided elders this month. Grain credits, winter fuel, debt relief. He is buying silence where he cannot buy loyalty. Darius's jaw set hard. If he has already moved on the servant quarter, we pull those families out tonight. Genevieve shook her head. He is expecting that. If wildfire troops cross into Ironhold streets, he claims invasion and unstable crown. Alara looked between them. Then what do you propose? Genevieve drew a breath that scraped on the way in. Expose his legal fraud in open council where he cannot edit the record after, and secure testimony from people he assumes no one listens to. Darius studied her face as if recalibrating the battlefield around this new center of gravity. You are asking to stand in a room built by his allies and challenge him on his terms. I am asking to drag his terms into Moon Witness where words still have consequence. For a moment he said nothing. The bond between them pulsed low and constant, not distracting now, but present as pressure against skin. Finally, he nodded once. Then we build a framework he cannot bend. 3 hours passed in relentless planning, runners dispatched, archive locks opened, old statutes copied by hand for speed. Genevieve sent the first external contact herself through Wildfire Signal Desk, dictating a coded request to Cook Mara in the Ironhold servant quarter. Confirm names and locations of children listed as dependents. Confirm any removals. Burn this message after reading. The signaler repeated each line for accuracy, then sent it by relay hawk to a neutral bakery roof where Mara's cousin handled market post. When the dispatch left, Genevieve's hands began to shake only after she no longer needed them steady. She stepped onto the narrow balcony outside the chamber, needing cold air more than privacy, and found Darius already there, forearms on the stone rail, gaze fixed on the descending road as if he could stare threats back down the mountain. He did not crowd her. You sent someone you trust. She trusts me despite good evidence against the habit. Genevieve wrapped her fingers around the rail. If Mara answers, Bastion may intercept. If she stays silent, we plan blind. He has made uncertainty part of his leverage. He has made people part of his leverage. Darius turned then, and dusk caught the burn marks along his wrist where his sleeves had ridden back. Genevieve, I need you to hear this clearly. If the council fractures, and we must choose between legal optics and your safety, I choose your safety. And he wins the narrative that you are unstable. Let him write what he likes. I have survived worse than slander. The tenderness in that ferocity hit harder than any raised voice. She could feel the pull toward him like tide against stone, frightening because it asked for surrender she had never practiced. She looked at his throat, at the cord where his signet hung, at the pulse there that echoed faintly inside her own chest. Inside, thought surged in present tense, relentless and honest. I am standing beside a man everyone calls ruthless, and he is offering me choice when my whole life has been arranged by other hands. I want to lean into him, and I want to run in the same breath. Want is dangerous when you have survived by needing nothing. But this bond does not feel like hunger alone. It feels like recognition with no disguise left. If I take one more step toward him, he will see the parts of me built from fear, from obedience, from years of being told I am useful only when silent. If he sees all of it and stays, then I cannot pretend I was unlovable. That truth might be the one thing I still do not know how to carry. Darius's voice softened. Where did you go just now? She gave him a strained half-smile. To a very untidy corner of my own mind. That makes two of us. A beat passed, then he added, dry and deliberate. My wolf has not mastered tidy either. A small laugh escaped her, brief and startled, and the sound seemed to alter his entire posture, easing a tension he had worn since dawn. By the second bell of evening, Mara's reply arrived. The hawk came in exhausted, one leg ribboned in neutral market twine and the other in a strip torn from common apron cloth, the agreed sign for urgent truth. Alara read first, then handed it to Genevieve. Attendance sweep at servant quarter by Ironhold guards this afternoon. Children counted and renamed as contract witnesses in pending debt case. Moved at dusk to Council Transit Barracks near Lower East Road. Fed and housed tonight. Guarded heavily. Rumor says public sentence threatened if Valewood claim proceeds. I am watched. Cannot send second letter safely. Genevieve read it twice, then once more when the words refused to settle into anything her body could survive. Fed and housed. Guarded heavily. Public sentence threatened. Language crafted for legality. Outcome built on terror. Darius took the message and the temperature in the room seemed to drop around him. Not rage spilling wild, but a controlled, lethal clarity that made captains straighten without being told. He has moved hostages under council cover, Alara said. He is daring us to act first. Melis lifted her chin toward Genevieve. He expects your silence or your panic. Either serves him. A horn sounded from the outer gate, sharp and formal. Visiting delegation under warrant. Alara reached for her sword. That will be his next layer. They met the delegation in the gate court under torchlight and hard wind. Bastian Ironhold stood at the center in dark traveling leathers trimmed like mourning, flanked by council clerks, 2 elder observers, and a ring of guards wearing legal white sashes over armor. He looked older than Genevieve remembered, and somehow more dangerous for it, because age had pared him down to appetite and calculation. His gaze found her immediately. Satisfaction flickered, then vanished into polite disdain. Genevieve, he said, as if greeting family at supper. You look healthier than rumor suggested. Darius stepped half a pace forward, not blocking her line of sight. State your purpose, and leave. Bastian lifted an iron tube and withdrew a rolled decree. Emergency writ from interim council chair. Full hearing at moonrise tomorrow in central chamber. All principal parties required. Refusal constitutes admission of fraud. Melis took the writ, scanned seals, and gave a grim nod. Authentic, Bastian continued, voice pitched to carry to every guard and clerk. Given escalating unrest attached to this woman's claims, Ironhold has accepted temporary guardianship of implicated servant quarter youths as material witnesses. Their treatment will depend on procedural compliance and public order. Genevieve felt Darius shift beside her, the predator at the edge again. She spoke first, each word cut clean. Do not dress extortion as governance. His smile showed no warmth. Then attend and recant. They return to routine placements. Persist, and council sentencing guidelines become regrettably broad when accomplice status is proven. One of the elder observers coughed, uncomfortable but silent. Darius's voice dropped into that dangerous quiet she now understood as the final warning given to men who thought themselves untouchable. You threaten children at my gate and call yourself lawful. I threaten nothing, Bastian said smoothly. I describe consequence. You of all men should respect order. He made to hand the decree directly to Genevieve. A legal gesture, a staged provocation. She did not reach for it. The clerk beside him stepped in to bridge the gap, fingers stretching toward her wrist to force contact and establish service under witness. Darius caught the clerk's forearm midair and held it suspended, claws not extended, grip unbreakable. No one touches what she has not freely given, he said. The court froze. Bastion's eyes narrowed, then brightened with predatory satisfaction, as if precisely this restraint under strain, were the moment he had come to harvest. Careful, Alpha. Witnesses are recording. Genevieve stepped around Darius's shoulder into full view of the scribes, lifted her own hand, and took the decree by its edge without allowing any of Ironhold's people to touch her skin. Service accepted, she said to Melis, loud enough for every pen. Under protest, under Moon Witness. With demand that all material witnesses be produced alive, unharmed, and uncoerced at hearing. Melis repeated the demand for the record. Bastion's expression tightened for the first time, not defeat. Annoyance at a variable refusing to behave. He bowed with mocking formality. Until moonrise, then. His delegation withdrew into the dark white sashes, vanishing one by one beyond the torch line. Wind tore at the edge of Genevieve's cloak. The decree in her hand felt heavier than iron. Alara read over her shoulder and swore softly. If we miss appearance, default judgment grants Ironhold interim custodial authority over disputed blood claimant and associated dependents. Darius looked toward the road where Bastion had disappeared, then back to Genevieve, and in his eyes she saw the same recognition she felt in her own bones. They had reached the edge where one wrong move would give Bastion everything. Moonrise tomorrow was no longer a hearing. It was a blade poised over all of them. Moonrise tomorrow was no longer a hearing. It was a blade poised over all of them, and Genevieve felt its edge in the silence that followed Bastion's departure. No one spoke for several breaths. Wind pressed through the gate court and snapped the torch flames sideways. Darius took the decree from her hand, read it once more, then passed it to Melis and Captain Alara in turn, each of them scanning for hidden clauses the way soldiers checked shadows for archers. He wants us exhausted and reactive, Alara said. He will stage outrage, then demand restraint from everyone but himself. Melis folded the writ with deliberate precision. Then we deny him both chaos and delay. We answer every clause in record order and force him into oath language. Genevieve stared at the road where the white sashes had vanished. He will not stay in language if he starts losing. Darius looked at her, and the bond carried a steady undertow of iron resolve. Then he loses anyway. They moved straight from the gate to the war chamber. Runners went out under Wildfire seal to every Allied delegation already within reach of the mountain roads. Melis drafted a compulsory witness motion requiring production of all named dependents alive, fed, and unbound. Alara stacked evidence at the center of the table in strict sequence: forged debt warrants from Ironhold patrols, coin ledgers tied to elder bribes, the register fragment bearing Valewood watermark, and Mara's urgent letter with market twine still knotted at the corner. Darius added one more item, laying his signet beside the pile like a vow made physical. By dawn, ink stained all their hands and no one had slept. The Central Council chamber opened at moonrise under full procedural guard. Stone benches climbed in concentric tiers around the ritual floor, where old arbitration channels had been carved generations earlier and later covered by governance seals that pretended blood had left law behind. Tonight, both systems were visible at once. Council clerks sat in double rows with fresh quills. Elder observers from Ridge and Valley packs lined the upper ring. Ironhold's white-sashed legal guards stood shoulder to shoulder near the eastern arch, too many for mere formality. Bastion entered last. He wore mourning black with a silver chain of interim authority across his chest, as if he were already officiating his own victory. 2 clerks carried a lacquered case behind him. 4 guards rolled in a low iron frame used for pre-unification blood arbitration, polished and waiting. A murmur traveled through the chamber, sharp as sleet on slate. Melis rose. Lord Bastion Ironhold explained the presence of arbitration apparatus in an identity hearing. Bastion inclined his head, all civility and poison. Because identity affects succession across 3 allied packs. Council precedent allows blood confirmation where fraud risk is elevated. I petition immediate kinship test and custodial transfer. He turned toward Genevieve with practiced sorrow. I offered private resolution. You chose spectacle. Genevieve's mouth went dry. Darius shifted one step nearer, not touching, anchoring. Bastian lifted a parchment. Exhibit 1. Kinship debt contract bearing the mark of Alowan Valewood as surviving guarantor. Debt inherited by dependent issue. Exhibit 2. Household registry naming Genevieve Ironhold under lawful guardianship. Exhibit 3. Witness statements from servant quarter dependents identifying this woman as absconder who incited flight. The chamber erupted into overlapping voices. Clerks shouted for order. Elder Varick demanded to inspect seals. Lady Senna called for immediate confinement pending verification. Ironhold guards advanced 3 paces at Bastian's signal, not enough to seize, enough to force the room toward panic. Genevieve's heartbeat climbed into her throat. She saw the trap as clearly as map lines. Drown the truth in procedure. Rush a blood right framed as neutral. Bind her under temporary custody. Then convert temporary into permanent with the speed of official ink. Darius's voice cut through the noise. No one approaches her. Bastian spread his hands. You resist lawful process again. Witnesses are recording your instability. A legal guard stepped across the inner mark and reached for the restraint frame chain. Another moved toward Genevieve with service tablets and binding cord hidden under the stack. Ilara barked an order. Wildfire captains closed ranks. The chamber teetered at the edge of armed conflict, while every elder shouted about decorum. Peril arrived without drama, only pressure from all sides at once. Genevieve could not breathe deeply enough. She was back in Ironhold corridors, back in rooms where men decided her body was an administrative problem. The old reflex screamed at her to shrink, to endure, to survive this hour and pay for it later. Inside, thought surged in a bright, relentless present. I can let them carry me and call it patience. I can stand behind Darius and let his strength absorb the blow. I can keep being the quiet version of myself they taught me to perform. If I do, children vanish into legal language and my name becomes evidence against me forever. I am afraid. I am still afraid. But fear is not instruction anymore. I am standing in the chamber where they erased me, and I am done asking permission to exist. She stepped around Darius into the open ring before anyone could reform the lines. Stop, she said, and the word cracked through the chamber harder than a shouted command. I invoke right of true line under moon witness. Silence slammed down. Malus went pale. Genevieve, that right cannot be called by proxy. Only a legitimate blood heir may initiate. Then record who spoke it. She crossed to the ancestral stone set in the chamber floor, a dark slab most councils used as decoration now, old runes dulled by generations of convenient neglect. Darius moved as if to follow. She lifted her hand without turning. Do not shield me from this. The request cost him. She could feel it through the bond like a restrained storm. He stopped at the ring edge, eyes fixed on her. Bastian recovered first, voice sharp with alarm beneath the polish. This is theatrics. Deny the motion. Milas stood. Under old charter, denial requires proof the caller lacks standing. Do you have it? He did not answer fast enough. Genevieve drew Ilara's utility blade from the table where evidence lay and cut her palm in one clean line. Pain flashed bright, then focused. She pressed blood to the ancestral stone. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then silver raced through carved channels beneath the floor, not wildfire but precise geometry, lines reappearing in radiant arcs around her feet and out toward every major seal in the chamber. Gasps rose from the upper benches as dormant Valewood runes kindled over her skin, tracing wrists, collarbone, throat in living light. The old system had recognized her before any council could vote otherwise. Bastian took a step back. Counterfeit glamour. Genevieve lifted her blooded hand and pointed to the lacquered case his clerks had carried in. Open his arbitration kit. Varric barked to the nearest clerk, who obeyed under seer authority. Inside lay pre-written oath slips naming Bastian as provisional regent over disputed pacts, dated and sealed before tonight's hearing began. The chamber roared. Malus seized one slip, read it aloud, then another with the same prepared outcome under different witness names. Predetermined judgment, she said coldly, filed before testimony. This hearing was staged. Genevieve turned in a full circle, voice steady now, carrying to every tear. You wanted blood arbitration, so do it cleanly. I redirect the circle under true line clause. Any false claimant speaking succession claim inside this ring is bound by his own oath and stripped under moon witness. Malus met her eyes, then struck the staff to seal the amendment. Recorded. Darius did not move, but pride and raw awe hit the bond like heat off forged stone. Bastian's composure fractured at the edges. You cannot rewrite counsel process. I just did, Genevieve said. Withstanding, you tried to burn. He strode into the ring anyway, betting force could still outrun consequence. I, Bastian Ironhold, lawful guardian and succession steward, claim custodial right over Genevieve Ironhold and derivative authority over Valewood-linked territories pending. The circle ignited. Silver fire climbed from rune to rune and snapped into iron links around his wrists, the same narrow restraint pattern used for debtor transport in Ironhold service corridors. Gasps became shouts. Bastian hit one knee hard, chain tension locking his arms behind him as the oath he had spoken fed the binding he had mocked. He snarled up at her, mask gone. You set me up. You built the cage, she said. I named the door. He twisted with surprising speed, one hand wrenching half free long enough to rip a concealed blade from inside his sleeve. He lunged toward her, desperate and ugly. Legal theater burned away to bare violence. Genevieve pivoted left, his strike slicing air where she had been, and drove her shoulder into his chest with all the force fear had stored for 10 years. He crashed back onto the lit stone. She planted her palm over the center of his sternum, runes blazing along her arm, and released a command pulse that rang through the chamber like struck metal. Down, she said. Power answered blood. Bastian's body locked against the floor, blade skittering across the ring. His breath came ragged, eyes bright with hate. You were born to serve. Genevieve leaned closer, voice low and absolute. I was born to end you. Malus rose to full height beside the record dais. By oath binding under true line, confirmed fraud, coercive hostage practice, and attempted armed assault within council chamber, I move immediate sentence, exile by mark, name stripped, rank void, pack protection, revoked. Seconded, Lady Senna said, voice shaking but firm. Seconded, Varric echoed louder. The chamber answered in a wave of assent that became unanimous before the final clerk could finish tallying. Darius stepped to the ring edge, hands at his sides, giving Genevieve the final choice. No rescue, no theft of her moment. At the far wall hung the execution gong used for irreversible council sanctions. Genevieve walked to it on unsteady legs that still held. She took the striker from the attendant, turned once to see Bastian pinned under the light he had dismissed, and brought the hammer down. The gong sounded through stone and bone, long and undeniable. Ironhold guards dropped their white sashes where they stood. Council wardens entered, removed Bastian's chain of authority, marked his forearm with the exile sigil under seer witness, and hauled him upright. He fought until the wardens tightened the oath links, then stumbled toward the western gate passage reserved for the nameless. At the threshold, he twisted back, searching for one last wound to inflict. None came. The chamber had already moved beyond him. When the doors shut behind his escort, Malus lifted the authenticated register fragment, Mara's letter, and the forged ledgers in sequence. All exhibits entered, fraud confirmed. Dependent witnesses to be transferred immediately to neutral protection under joint wildfire and council oversight. Ilara exhaled like a soldier hearing the end of battle bells. Darius crossed the ring at last and stopped in front of Genevieve, eyes shining with something deeper than triumph. She was shaking. So was he. But she was still standing, blood on her palm, her name intact, while the law that had been sharpened to cut her now carried her voice in its official record. While the last echoes of the gong still trembled through the chamber walls, Malus called the record to final order and made every piece of evidence answer for itself in open view. The forged debt warrants were stamped void and pinned to the fraud board. The bribery ledgers were sealed under council wax for restitution hearings. The pre-written oath slips from Bastion's lacquered case were read aloud, each date and signature entered as proof of conspiracy. Mara's letter, with its market twine and torn apron strip, was copied by 3 clerks and authenticated as coercion notice. The brittle Valewood register fragment was wrapped in moon silk and placed in the succession archive chest under Genevieve's hand. Even the decree Bastion had served at the gate was amended line by line until the clause on dependents became protected minors under neutral wardship. Nothing vanished back into convenient darkness. By the time the chamber doors opened to midnight air, Captain Ilara returned from the Lower East Road with Cook Mara, 6 council wardens, and 23 children blinking in torchlight and clutching travel blankets. Ina spotted Genevieve first and broke into a run that ended in a fierce, shaking embrace around her waist. "You came back," Ina whispered into her cloak, voice rough with held tears. "I said I would," Genevieve answered, sinking to her knees despite the ache in her ankle. "You are safe now." Mara's usually steady mouth trembled once before she mastered it. "Transit barracks registers were altered exactly as your message warned. We caught the original list in the stove before they burned it. Malus has both versions." Malus lifted a narrow packet. "Already submitted." Corvin signed the transfer order under witness when presented with the forged custody language. He claimed ignorance. The council accepted his testimony and removed him from Ironhold authority pending review. Darius stood a step behind Genevieve, close enough that she felt the calm force of him at her back, far enough to leave the moment hers. When Ina finally let go, he crouched to her height and offered his hand in solemn greeting rather than command. Ina stared, then placed her small palm in his. "No one moves you without lawful cause again," he said. "That is wildfire law now." An hour later, after the children were settled in the warm lower wing with bread, broth, and actual names written beside their beds, Genevieve walked with Darius down the moonlit path to the ruined temple where the bond had first struck like lightning. The storm had cleared. Wet stone gleamed silver, and pine smoke from distant watchfires drifted through the broken arches. She still wore blood at the edge of her cuff. He still wore exhaustion in every line of his body. Neither pretended either wound had vanished just because victory had spoken their names. At the center dais, he stopped and faced her fully. The cord with his signet rested against his throat, rising and falling with a breath he did not hide. "Genevieve," he said, voice frayed and reverent at once, "we can wait until dawn, or a week, or longer. I will not take what fear cannot carry, but I am done pretending this bond is only instinct. I choose you in law, in war, in whatever peace we build next. If you choose me, I ask to mark you tonight." She held his gaze and let the truth move through her without flinching. "I am here in the place where I almost surrendered, and now I am being asked instead of handled, seen instead of managed. I am still afraid of losing this, of failing it, of waking tomorrow and finding a price hidden beneath tenderness, but the fear no longer rules the room. I want this man with my whole unsteady heart. I want the vow to have teeth and mercy both. I want to stop living as if I am temporary." "Yes," she said, "I choose you. Mark me." His eyes closed for a heartbeat that looked like prayer. When he stepped in, he touched her cheek first, then paused at the line of her jaw, giving her one last chance to turn away. She leaned into his hand. Consent answered, consent. Darius bent to the junction of her neck and shoulder, breath warm against rain-cooled skin, and his teeth sank in deep enough to hurt, sharp enough to demand truth. Pain flared bright and immediate. She gripped his shoulders and held through it, a soft cry breaking from her chest as heat chased the sting, then overtook it, molten and ringing through her veins in widening circles. Gold and silver threads burst between them, visible in the dark as braided light from his sternum to hers, from her pulse to his. The bond opened like a gate unbarred from both sides. Mine, he whispered against her skin, rough with awe. Yours, she breathed back, trembling. His wolf surged through the link, not as domination, but devotion stripped bare. She felt it drop to one knee inside the shared space of them, ancient power choosing allegiance. Her own animal awareness rose to meet it, fierce and clear, no longer caged into silence. The two heartbeats that had fought for rhythm since the temple storm began to align. When he lifted his head, a trace of blood and moonlight marked his mouth. He looked wrecked, relieved, utterly certain, and she loved him for the certainty he offered without chains. She slid her hand to the back of his neck and drew him down. Your turn, she said. He went still, then nodded once. Always your choice. Genevieve bared her teeth over the pulse point at his throat and bit. His breath punched out on a broken sound, hands tightening at her waist but never forcing. The taste of iron and cedar flooded her senses. Pain sparked under her jaw and transformed almost at once into a rush of warmth so profound it bordered on joy. Light flared again, brighter, the threads between them thickening until they looked like living metal braided through air. Mine, she whispered against his skin. Yours, he answered, voice shaking. Mate. The final word settled the bond. Not an explosion this time, but a deep grounding click, like a lock finally finding its true key. The restless pressure she had carried for years eased from behind her ribs. His breathing steadied with hers. The world did not vanish. Stone stayed cold. Wind stayed real. Scars stayed scars. But inside the link, nothing was fractured anymore. He folded her into his arms, careful of the fresh mark on her shoulder. She rested her forehead to his and felt the bond hum low and content between them. No more running alone, he said. No more crowns without us both, she replied. At first light, the public claiming ceremony filled the rebuilt Moon Temple with every allied banner and half the mountain territory besides. No one hid the old damage in the stones. New mortar traced clean lines through ancient fractures, as if the place itself had chosen honesty over polish. Genevieve stood in dark silver ceremonial leather, her mark visible at her throat, Darius at her side with hers over his pulse in plain view. Melis officiated. Ilara commanded the guard ring. Mara and the servant quarter families sat in the front tier, Ina between them, boots swinging above the floor as she clutched a sweet roll and watched with solemn delight. Melis called the decrees one by one, and this time law sounded like repair instead of threat. Coerced kinship contracts were outlawed across all signatory pacts. Debt bondage without renewable adult consent became a punishable offense. Servant districts were reclassified as protected civil wards with elected advocates. The restored Valewood record established Genevieve's succession standing and her installation as Luna Queen and co-ruler of the mountain fortress. Darius's title was amended in the formal role from sole sovereign to bonded crown, governance shared by oath rather than courtesy. Elder Varric rose, clearing his throat with visible discomfort. For the record, I oppose this claim. I was wrong. Lady Senna stood after him, cane tapping stone. I mistook humility for ambition's mask. It was endurance. I was wrong as well. Genevieve accepted both acknowledgments with a nod, not triumph, not absolution, simply closure that had been earned in daylight. Corvin's written confession of warrant abuse was read and filed. He lost magistrate authority and entered supervised restitution service. Lady Mira Ironhold, named in household coercion testimony, was stripped of estate control and placed under civic sanction. Hadrian, the courier, kept his post after producing unaltered dispatch copies that helped prove timeline fraud. No loose thread was left to rot into future harm. When Malus joined their hands over the moonstone and asked for final vows, Darius spoke first, voice carrying without strain. She came back. She stayed. She was seen. Before Pack, Moon, and Law, I vow partnership over pride, listening over command, and home that does not require silence. Genevieve answered, steady and bright. He asked. He waited. He chose me in truth. Before Pack, Moon, and Law, I vow courage without hiding, mercy without surrender, and rule that remembers those once left outside the gate. Together, they said, mate. The temple answered with a rising howl from the gathered wolves beyond the ridge, wild and jubilant, rolling over the mountains like a promise finally kept. Darius kissed her brow, then her marked throat. Ina whooped. Mara laughed outright. Ilara, pretending sternness, wiped at one eye and failed to hide it. Genevieve looked across the people who were no longer statistics in someone else's ledger, felt the settled bond warm and sure beneath her skin, and understood with startling calm that this was what safety had always meant. Not a cage with softer walls, but a life where her name, her love, and her power could stand in the open and remain her own.